It's time for the Blevins Franks conversation on Bay Radio, and we're in April, and April means the start of a new tax year in the UK. And as UK tax continues to impact British expatriates in Spain who still have property, investments and pensions there, today Brett Hanson would explain what changed on the 6th of April 2026 and what hasn't. And importantly, he'll look ahead to the much bigger change coming in a year's time. How are you doing, Brett?
I'm doing very good, Howard. What about yourself?
I'm doing well. It's never boring, is it? I tell you, what's going on. So therefore, let's start at the very beginning. Income tax. Have the rates changed at all for 2026-27 tax year? And what about those thresholds?
It's a great place to start, Howard, because this is where a lot of people can be most affected. But in reality, the headline rates remain exactly the same as last year. So the basic rate of income tax in the UK remains at 20%, the higher rate at 40%, and the additional tax rate at 45%. But for me, the more important story is what's happening with the thresholds, or rather, what isn't happening with them, as they've been frozen again. In fact, they're not going to increase until at least April 2031. This means that the personal allowance of £12,570 and the higher rate thresholds will not be increasing in line with inflation for at least another 6 years. So if your income is not increasing, then inflation is eating into your income. And if your income is rising, then more of it is creeping into higher tax bands, whereby over time, this results in people paying significantly more income tax without any official tax rate increase. It's quite a subtle policy, but very effective from a Treasury perspective. And for individuals, it can feel like a hidden tax rise.
So what has changed from the 6th of April that may affect our listeners?
Well, the one which got much of the news when it first was announced is the agricultural property relief and business property relief, new limits applicable to UK inheritance tax. From the 6th of April, the 100% rate of relief, which meant these assets were not liable to UK inheritance tax, is restricted to the first 2.5 million of combined agricultural and business property, with relief being reduced to 50% for values above this. This is per individual and can be transferred between spouses, but will affect some farm owners in the UK, and this is why we saw Jeremy Clarkson and other farmers protesting towards the end of 2024 and 2025. Other than this, there are a few changes, but they're more incremental than dramatic, and again, they tend to increase the overall tax burden in less obvious ways. One of the biggest ongoing shifts is the reduction in allowances. For example, the capital gains tax annual exemption has already been cut quite significantly compared to where it was a few years ago. So investors who previously wouldn't have had to think about capital gains tax are now finding themselves within the scope. We're also seeing continued tightening in how income and investments are reported, particularly for people with cross-border arrangements. For British expatriates in Spain, this is especially relevant because there's increasing information sharing between HMRC and the Spanish tax authorities. So even if the rules themselves don't look radically different on paper, enforcement, transparency, and the practical impact on individuals are all increasing. It's becoming much harder to, let's say, Howard, fly under the radar, and much more important to have everything properly structured and declared.
The clock is now ticking to April 2027, with less than a year to go before these reforms come into effect. What changes from that date?
Well, the big one is that from the 6th of April 2027, pension funds will also be taken into account with regards to UK inheritance tax. This, Howard, will likely lead to many more estates rising above the UK inheritance tax thresholds when this tax becomes payable, and more people are likely to lose part or all of the main home allowance if their pensions tip their total estate above the £1 million mark. I believe it was already being predicted that the number of estates which would pay UK inheritance tax would nearly double over the coming years, what with the continued freeze on the thresholds where UK inheritance tax becomes payable. But with the changes announced by Chancellor Rachel Reeves on pensions and farms, this tax is likely to increase further. But sticking to pensions, I think it's worth pointing out, Howard, that not only will UK pensions be included within the value of a person's estate for a UK inheritance tax, but when beneficiaries start drawing down an income from these inherited pensions, they'll still be liable to income tax at the beneficiary's income tax rates. So for a UK beneficiary, they will potentially see 40% UK inheritance tax paid on the pension fund, and then up to 45% tax on any income taken from the remainder of the pension. And it's important to remember, Howard, that when it comes to UK inheritance tax, many people living in Spain may incorrectly assume that because they've left the UK, their estate is outside of the UK tax net. But under fairly new rules, this may not be the case, particularly if in the past they've spent a substantial number of years in the UK. And crucially, this could bring worldwide assets, not just UK-based ones, into the scope for UK inheritance tax. But turning back to pensions, Howard, whilst in the past they've been one of the most tax-efficient assets to pass on, in that in many cases they've sat outside the inheritance tax net altogether, this will be changing in April 2027, and that's a major shift.
Well, pensions becoming subject to UK inheritance tax will hit expatriates as well as UK residents. But what can they do about it? Since I believe transferring pensions overseas incurs prohibitive tax charges. What's your advice to British expatriates in Spain with UK pensions, or indeed any UK assets?
Well, as you've implied there, Howard, the obvious reaction to this change to pension funds and UK inheritance tax will be for some people to think, well, I'll just move my pension overseas. But it's not that straightforward anymore, because transfers can now trigger a 25% tax charge if they don't meet very specific criteria. So rather than rushing into a transfer, what people really need to do is take a step back and look at their overall position. That includes how long they've been non-UK resident, the size and structure of their pension, how their assets are held more broadly, and how UK rules interact with Spanish tax rules. In many cases, the better approach is careful planning around the pension rather than trying to move it. That might involve coordinating estate planning, using tax-efficient investment structures for Spain, and ensuring everything aligns across both jurisdictions. The key point, Howard, is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and acting without advice can be very costly. This is where the skills of an experienced, qualified and regulated advisor in Spain, with cross-border expertise such as Blevins Franks, should be used. So the main takeaway here, Howard, is that while the 2026 changes might feel relatively modest, they're part of a much bigger picture, and that picture becomes very real in April 2027. Good planning in this area isn't something you can do at the last minute. It takes time to assess your position, consider your options, and put the right structure in place. So if you're a British expatriate in Spain, or are residing in the UK but are seriously thinking of moving to Spain, then if you have UK assets, particularly pensions, now is the time to start reviewing things. Because the earlier you act, the more flexibility you have, and the better the outcome is likely to be.
And on the Blevins Franks website, you can find a contact form for the first step, yes?
That's right, Howard. We have offices throughout Europe and particularly in Spain. And if anyone would like to speak to a Blevins Franks advisor local to them in Spain, then they can go to our website, find the most local office and contact us.
Many thanks. Thanks you very much. And of course, the website is blevinsfranks.com.
Thank you, Howard. Bye now.